Hello everyone, welcome back to the Central European city of Altengrad in city Skylines. Last time we built some of the more modern city walls that still remain standing in this time period, as they were not really in the way of any city expansion or other projects, mostly because of the difficult terrain around them. Today we will move across the city to the cargo harbor area and more specifically to the small town that is already part of the bigger city these days. We will finish the town, do some landscaping around it, build more farms, and we'll also build a second tram depot. So let's go. And we are going to start with that second depot right away, even though I should add that I am going to be calling it the second depot, but chronologically this was most probably, the first one built in Altengrad, because the one that we did previously, the first one built, in the series built, not really in the city. It was probably built like maybe in this time period, in this very time period, just a couple of years ago or like 10 years ago or something like that. It's very new. But the one that we are building right now, that might have actually been the actual first depot that Altengrad saw. It definitely used to be the terminus as well for the tram lines, but as the city of Altengrad itself grew, it kind of swallowed all the towns around it that joined the rest of the city, and there was kind of a need to just properly join them with the public transport as well. So that's why this depot is not really going to be on the terminus, but it's just going to be, in the middle of the line, which is pretty much the case even for that new depot as well, which also is, on the outer edge of the city, let's say. But then after it, there is that industrial zone. That is also something fairly recently built, or at least recently expanded, right, into today's size. Anyway, what I'm doing in here is quite simple. I really wanted to try something completely custom for this area. I really knew that I would like to use these particular buildings for the tram depot because they just felt absolutely fitting. I was taking some inspiration from real life, from the really old depots in Prague, obviously, and they kind of look very similar like this, even like size-wise, let's say. So that's perfectly fine. Now, I'm using procedural objects in here. I'm basically just cutting away a lot of stuff from this warehouse building, the main warehouse building. I made it smaller just so it's going to fit the trams. Then I just did some kind of pillars at the front and some kind of this building on the side, which I'm actually later going to slightly extend to make the depot a bit larger still. Anyway, you can already see that, actually this is the first time, right, that you can see properly the new trams that I chose for Altengrad. These are absolutely amazing. Like, very nice detail on these. I'm finally not really afraid of showing the trams in like full detail, very close-up shots of these trams, because they just look absolutely amazing. They might be probably the most detailed vehicles that I have right now in the city, and the fact that it's the trams is just, it's just great. It's just absolutely amazing. So this is something that I was heavily copying kind of as well from real life. It's these rails that are obviously connecting the depot to the street. Now the depot is not really built perpendicularly to the street because I thought I would just like to spice it up somehow, make it a bit more interesting. So I chose this. Then there are two entrances for the rails into the depot area from two different points, and they are kind of forming this X letter. And then from the center of that X, there is just going to be some of these like switches and connections everywhere else, right? So I'm, again, just like with the previous depot, using these PEVEX made inserts, I think they're called, because they are super easy to work with, and they already come with the wires, which is really, really convenient for me because I don't need to put the wires over the tracks anymore. I will have to do some kind of like catenaries or like cable holders, the wires that hold the actual power lines, but that's going to be easy compared to just, doing all this from scratch, obviously. So this was actually kind of a satisfying process to just watch all these tracks unfold, how it's all coming nicely together. It's obviously going to be decorative, as you can see, even though now that I'm thinking of it, I do have, I think, like a little block service for, just like all the rest of the block service buildings that I have and use. I even have it for a tram depot. So I suppose I could have actually used it and made at least a single track functional so the trams would be able to work with the depot, but we can always do that later. But in Altengrad, it's not really that big of a deal because the entire tram network is interconnected. So technically, we only need a single functioning depot in the city, and that's the one that we built previously, because there I actually used a proper building for the depot, the 1930s Dresden building, I think it was. Right, so anyway, this is almost done with the tracks. I'm just now going to, and that was what I was talking about. I just extended the building slightly with that, with a different model. Or was I talking about? Maybe I wasn't. Whatever. The building is mostly done. Just this little roof in the front, and then a couple of warehouses at the back to just finish these gaps that are left because of the procedural objects manipulation. But that's all fine. Also, I made sure to include this like a loop track that goes around the buildings. I'm not exactly super sure why it would be used, because, or maybe just like, turning around for the trams, I guess. Yeah, that might be a good idea. These days, some of the more modern depots have like washing stations for the vehicles on these kinds of loops. So, it's probably just used for like sorting the trams a bit better. I know that I didn't really include the connections for all of the tracks. The real life depot that I was taking inspiration from pretty much has all the tracks accessible from both directions of the street. Well, not all of them, but most of them do. But in this particular depot, I didn't really do that. So that's not like super realistic, I suppose. But I think I was redoing this like 3 times partially, and at this point I just decided to just roll with it because it's good enough. It's like looking fine. Okay. Now, one important thing that I needed to really decide at this point was to just how to continue the city from this point forward, really. And not just forward, but also backwards into the rest of the city, not just into this little town, right? Now, I decided that I'm really going to try to get it a bit faster, like build it a bit faster, these kinds of like suburbs and everything. And I'm only going to show you a couple of shots, a couple of time lapses here from building the infrastructure mostly, because that's the most important. And the buildings, I'm just going to fill this place with exactly the same low density structures that I put everywhere else around the city, right? So even going around the main part of the city, we are probably going to continue with this trend, and I'm not really going to add that many like super specific projects. I only have a couple of them in mind. I think I can already spoil that in the next episode I would like to return actually close to those walls that we did last time and build a botanic garden in there, which is nicely going to just fill like a big area, and it's also going to form the edge of the city, so that's going to be nice. And then we have some space left, if you remember, in that tram loop in the modern residential area, which is like on the other side of that modern bridge, right? On the other side from the castle. I mean, it's probably a bit difficult to talk about these places without showing you the map or something. But that's probably going to be a place where I might build some like modern houses, modern big buildings, offices maybe as well. And then we're just going to wrap the city up with more of this low density. But I really would like to just, already wrap it up with the 1930s Altengrad. So only a couple of projects here left. In the downtown, we have to still finish, for example, the main train station. And I would still like to use some of the 1930s residential blocks of buildings that I downloaded, because those are looking very nice and I wouldn't be really able to use them in later decades, right? So that's gonna be pretty much the plan for the next couple of episodes, right? And then we are going to finally do the transition. Now, speaking for the plans, I actually already recorded the first tram ride through the city, and that was pretty much the reason why I decided to jump to this part of the city in today's episode and finish all these places, because they are going to be right on this line that we are going to see in the first person ride. Okay, so all of it is going to be complete after today's episode, and that's going to look very, very good. Now, I'm almost done with this tram depot. As you can see, I just did some kind of an outer wall, then I'm going to do surfaces and these kinds of connections into the rest of the world. Some kind of a gatehouse, little gatehouse with a barrier, some buildings, more buildings here and there, and just some, smaller details, surfaces, trees, the cables that I was talking about, streetlights, and all those kinds of things. Okay. By the way, now that I think of it, I want to thank you for the comments for the previous video. It was kind of nice. I was talking in the previous video, Aurelia episode, I was talking about what I'm actually doing in City Skylines, and some of you commented that I was kind of explaining myself or whatever. Why am I building these virtual dioramas in City Skylines? I don't really think of it that way. I was kind of just trying to maybe organize my thoughts, really, and kind of answer the question of why I'm playing City Skylines, even for myself, So it was actually kind of nice to see that it sparked some discussion and to see that a lot of people are thinking the same way about City Skylines detailing. So that was really nice. That was really, really nice. Oh yeah, this thing I'm showing in the time lapse, I'm not really sure why I didn't do it before in both of my projects, really, but I finally used I think it's the no problem mod, and I turned off the notifications for not connected tracks, right? Because especially in the depot area, it was starting to be a bit confusing and you couldn't really see anything. So I turned it off. I suppose that I should have done that even for the previous depot project, but oh well, better late than never, I suppose. So this was necessary because I needed to do the cables, the holders, the catenaries, absolutely everywhere. As you can see, I'm making sure to put them everywhere in the bends. In the main area of the depot, I just used the cables to connect some of the places where the bends are on the actual wires, and it's not really super precise, but I didn't really want to bother with it too much. Also, I don't really have that much control over where the bends happen of the wires on top of the existing tracks, right? Because they already come with the same network. I would otherwise have to do it like completely custom, and I don't think I have that strength in me to really do that in these kinds of super complicated areas, right? So this will have to do, and it's looking fine. It's looking really, really good. It's just like a mess of wires in there. That's like the impression that you're gonna get from this area, and that's all that matters, really. So surfaces, some kind of parked vehicles, trucks, and that's all done. Now we are going to move to the very end of this tram line that we are going to see in that tram ride episode next time. Now, this is going to be the terminus. As you can see, this has the loop. This loop is actually very old. It has been here since we started working on pretty much the infrastructure of this area. So, I don't know, a couple of episodes, well, actually a lot of episodes ago, when we did this village, started doing this village. Now, it was clear that I really wanted to have some kind of a tram loop over here, and I also wanted to make this area a bit more modern. So at first I was thinking of maybe turning this into like a residential area, modern residential area, but then I thought I'm going to do a different project. I'm going to build a modern cemetery. Now, when I say modern, I mean like really modern, maybe just built like a decade ago or a couple of years ago, but definitely in somewhere in this time period, right? Again, I took some inspiration from real life, from some of the cemeteries that I either seen or I know they exist and they're looking kind of nice. So they usually have these buildings, like a very plain looking buildings at the front, low buildings like this, and some kind of a central gate. These buildings might be some kind of cemetery administration or even like a flower shop these days. I'm not really sure what they would be back in the day. Maybe the same thing. And then we are going to do kind of a random shape of the actual inside area of the cemetery, right? I'm going to fill it with a couple of paths and just, some details. I'm not really going to fill it completely with all the gravestones and everything because, the cemetery is new. So it doesn't really make much sense to realistically just fill it up because it would be mostly empty. It's not really going to be mostly empty. There are going to be some things inside, But yeah, it's going to look nice. It's just a nice thing to do in the city because I don't think I have done a cemetery yet. I know that I still need to do some kind of an old cemetery because obviously before this one, the city needed to have at least one, but preferably more. Oh, now that I remember, I actually did one on that small village in the center of the farm fields, basically. but that's not really counting for Altengrad itself, right? So I suppose I still need to build at least one, like a more older cemetery. So somewhere close to the areas that we already built, of course, near the downtown. Anyway, I'm using all kinds of details that are specifically used for the cemetery. So these kinds of like bigger patches of the cemetery blocks or gravestones. I'm not really sure what they're called. I know that they might be not exactly super Central European. These kinds usually, I'm actually not sure if it's something that you see only these days or it was already in the 1930s, the style the same. I think the styles were kind of the same because obviously most of these gravestones are really old, and they would not only have the vertical stone, but they would also have the horizontal, like a plate slab. I'm not really sure how to call it, or at least like a little garden in front of it. I didn't really find anything like that in the workshop, but to be fair, I was not exactly trying because I already had these. And I really didn't want to just detail one by one, so I was kind of happy to just use these, and they look absolutely fine, especially with this detailing all around them. So in this particular area, I just decided to build like a little tomb with some trees, benches, details, and the entire area of the cemetery is just divided by the hedgerows, which is something super common that I see in these, and it's looking really, really nice. It obviously helps to divide the area, to provide a lot of shielding from like noise, even from the outside. You can just really spend your place in there in real quiet because of the hedgerows. I suppose I could have built them a bit taller now that I look at the place, but I think it turned out looking okay, and I think I kind of captured well the modernness of the cemetery by just twisting the paths a little. So I think overall this turned out looking good. I'm kind of satisfied with this. Just a tiny project, really. Now the next thing that we need to do is to finally finish this town, and this is going to be something, or this was something that I was not really looking forward to because it's just the same thing over and over again, right? Finishing all these blocks. That's kind of the reoccurring problem in Altengrad, especially because I want to make Altengrad realistic, which means, or semi-realistic, let's be honest. And that means that I need to just fill a bunch of areas with just residential buildings, right? Because real life cities just have that. But in City Skylines, these kinds of repetitive tasks are just not so interesting to watch, to build, or, just overall, they're not. So I'm mostly going to be skipping through this, and I think that I already mentioned that in previous episodes that I'm not really going to try to build these big villages anymore. This was just like a one-time thing that I kind of get hyped for at the start, but as it started growing, I was, started thinking that this might have been maybe a bit of a mistake, but eventually it actually turned out looking fine, and even the not so detailed places that I decided to just do, they're fine. I'm not really going to zoom in that close with the cinematics. I'm only going to show a couple of places that I did detail properly, and that's going to be just absolutely, satisfactory, let's say. So now the most satisfying part of this entire project, and that is making or painting the farms and the tree lines. So this is something that I talked about many times before. I finally settled on using this technique. So I'm just using the the resource painter, painting all these resources with the farmlands. That's actually the name of the theme, farmlands textures. And it's just serving as some kind of a landscaping tool, really, to fill the rest of the map. Outside of the city. It's something necessary. It's something that obviously needs to be here if I'm going to call this city a tiny bit realistic, at least. So that's necessary. And it's not even looking that terrible, even though it's super fast to build, not much detailing going on. It's just these paintings and trees. That's literally it. Oh yeah, and maybe some couple of paths through the area that I'm building right here, just to make it a bit more varied, make it more spicy. And it's going to look very nice, especially in the close shots or low angle shots, right? Not really close shots, actually very far away shots, but low angle shots. So you can see the farm fields from like a more realistic, like a pedestrian view. it's going to look especially great from the first-person view of the trams. So that's partially the reason why I did these farms almost completely, so that the first-person view from the tram is going to see this and it's going to look like really great. I'm going to include actually one cinematic at the end of today's video, where I'm going to do like a somewhat lowish angle shot of this village, entire village, and the farm fields. They are the final little cherry on top of the cake, right? That is the outside of the city. It's just looking great. I know I keep repeating that, but it's just kind of satisfying because this is obviously a huge area that I'm filling with these. As you can tell by that shot there, I basically did like another, I don't know, 20% maybe of the overall area of the map that I want to cover with the farms. So that's great. That's great that it's just coming this fast. One last thing that I did there was to just get rid of some of the painting here and there to just make some farm fields only like plains, right? Because that's something I did on the other side. Actually, the reason for me just zooming out constantly and checking the other farm field that I did on the other side of the city was to make sure that it's kind of similar, because I obviously don't need or don't want to have the farm fields look completely different in these, different projects. It's probably best to just do these farm fields in like one take, because you kind of have it in your hand, let's say, to just do certain sizes of the farm fields at one point in time. So yeah, it's probably just better to do it all at once. Anyway, this is the transition before and after. Look at that huge area that we filled today. It wasn't really filled by that many projects, like building projects. It was mostly by just the farms and trees. But that's exactly what this part of the city needs, because we are on the edge of the city. It might not exactly stay being the edge of the city in the coming decades. It obviously might see some expansion, and in the end, this tram depot is going to end up being, I don't know, in like a outer center of the city or something like that. So, we will see. We will see where it's going to take us. Did I already tell you how I like these new tram models? They are absolutely amazing. I finally decided to just paint them this dark red color because it's just looking so great. I just love them. And the first person cinematic shots, the ride shots, they are going to be just great. I was really satisfied when I managed to recording without really running over too many pedestrians in those shots as well. All right. So that's really something to look forward to. It's going to be this very line that goes into the village. And yeah, this is that low angle shot that I was talking about. The farm fields from the top view, like directly down looking, are not really looking that amazing. I suppose partially because that's not really the view that you see, but as a pedestrian, obviously. But these kinds of low angle shots, that's something you can relate to, right? And yeah, I can safely say that these kinds of sceneries I probably have seen in real life. So I guess mission accomplished, really, if the goal was to make it somewhat realistic looking. But it's probably the least detailed approach to these kinds of farm fields you can do in city skylines. So it's got to be not exactly all that nice when you just go very close, right? So that's just like a price to pay for this very fast making of the farm fields. Anyway, this is the shot of the terminus loop here near the cemetery. All is just nicely blending together to the rest of the area. I also built a couple of like apartment buildings here and there. Maybe built very recently, not that many trees around them to kind of, make it look like it's something recently built, as it probably is. And overall, just doing a couple of details, mostly just on the tram road, just fences and like bushes right next to the fences. And I also did some street lights here and there, benches on that tram stops and everything like that, all right? So anyway, guys, like I said many times before, stay tuned for the tram ride episode from Altengrad, which is coming in the next episode of this series. And until then, take care and goodbye. Thank you for watching.